Pack your bags, Eleanor. This house belongs to the real family now. The real family after 30 years in this house? You heard me. Take what's yours and leave.
On the night my husband was buried, my daughter-in-law stood in my kitchen and said, "Pack your bags. This house belongs to the real family now." So I packed 2 old suitcases, left before sunrise, and let them move into the mansion they thought they had inherited. But what they didn't know was simple. That house had been mine for 12 years. And by the time they learned the truth, they had already exposed every greedy thought they tried to hide. My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and I was 62 years old when I buried my husband beside the slow, silver water of the Savannah River. The funeral was held at St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, an old brick church with stained glass windows, polished wooden pews, and bells that sounded far too beautiful for a day that had torn my life in half. My husband, Robert Whitmore, had been 71, tall even in his final months, with silver hair, a quiet voice, and the kind of reputation that made people lower their tone when they spoke his name. To Savannah society, Robert was a gentleman, a businessman, a generous donor, and the last great Whitmore. To me, he was the man who still kissed my forehead every morning. I sat in the front pew, wearing a simple black dress and the pearl necklace Robert had given me on our 10th anniversary. People kept touching my shoulder and whispering, "You were such a devoted wife, Eleanor." I nodded, because that was what widows were expected to do. Smile softly. Accept sympathy. Fall apart later. But I was not the only one being watched. Across the aisle sat Grant Whitmore, Robert's eldest son from his first marriage. Grant was 45, broad-shouldered, perfectly dressed, and always looked as though he was one phone call away from closing a deal. During the hymns, I saw him glance at his watch twice. Beside him was Caroline Whitmore, Robert's daughter, 42, elegant and sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who could cry without smudging her mascara. She dabbed at her eyes during the service, but when the pastor mentioned Robert's legacy, her expression changed, just for a second. Then there was Ethan, Robert's youngest son, 35, gentle-faced and nervous, the boy I had helped raise since he was 11. He sat beside his wife, Vanessa. Vanessa Whitmore was 34, beautiful in a polished, expensive way, with dark hair pulled into a perfect bun and a black dress that looked more like a statement than mourning. She had never liked me. Not openly, of course. Women like Vanessa rarely show their knives in public. During the reception at our Riverside mansion, she showed them. Guests filled the house with low voices, black coats, perfume, and pity. I moved from room to room thanking people, while my hands felt numb around each empty coffee cup I collected. Only Lily, Ethan's 7-year-old daughter, seemed to notice I was barely breathing. She slipped her small hand into mine near the staircase and whispered, "Grandma Eleanor, are you okay?" I looked down at her soft brown curls and sweet, frightened eyes. "I'm trying to be," I said. She squeezed my hand like she understood more than a child should. From the hallway, I heard Vanessa's voice. "Does Robert keep the safe in his study or upstairs?" I turned. She was speaking to Marla, our housekeeper, a kind woman in her late 50s who had worked for us for nearly a decade. Marla's face tightened. "I wouldn't know, ma'am," she said. Vanessa smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Of course." A few minutes later, I saw Grant step out onto the veranda with his phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, I need Harold's office number," he said quietly. "No, not next week. Tomorrow morning. We need to understand the estate before things get complicated." The estate. My husband had not been in the ground for 3 hours. I walked upstairs to escape the whispers. But as I passed my bedroom, I stopped. Vanessa stood in front of my mirror, my pearl necklace, the one Robert had fastened around my neck years ago with trembling fingers and a shy smile, was in her hands. She held it against her throat, tilting her chin as if testing how it would look when it became hers. Our eyes met in the mirror. For one long second, neither of us spoke. Then Vanessa smiled, a small, cruel smile. "I was just admiring it," she said. I stepped into the room, my voice calm enough to frighten even me. It belonged to Robert's mother. Her fingers tightened around the pearls. How sentimental. "No," I said, walking closer. "Important." She took the necklace off slowly and placed it on the dresser, but her eyes never left mine. That was the moment I understood. Robert's children were not grieving a father. They were waiting for permission to divide a life. And Vanessa was looking at me as if I were the last locked door between her and everything she thought she deserved. By sunset, the guests began to leave. The mansion grew quieter, darker, colder. I stood at the window overlooking the Savannah River, watching the water move as if nothing in the world had changed. But everything had. Behind me, in the house Robert and I had built into a home, his family was already whispering about money. And I finally realized the funeral had not been the end of my grief. It was only the beginning. By 9:30 that night, the last guest had left the mansion. The house was finally quiet, but it was not peaceful. Empty wine glasses sat on the side tables. Black coats had left faint traces of rainwater near the front door. The scent of lilies from the funeral arrangements still filled the hallway. Too sweet, too heavy, like grief pretending to be beautiful. I stood in the kitchen, slowly wrapping leftover food in foil because I needed something to do with my hands. If I stopped moving, I was afraid the weight of Robert's absence would crush me. That was when I heard heels crossing the marble floor. Vanessa appeared first. She had changed nothing about herself since the funeral. Her black dress was still perfect. Her lipstick had not faded. Her face carried no sign of exhaustion, only decision. Behind her came Grant, stiff and businesslike, and Caroline, holding a glass of white wine she had no business drinking in my kitchen on the night her father was buried. Ethan came last. He stood near the doorway, half hidden in shadow, his hands in his pockets, his eyes on the floor. Vanessa placed both palms on the kitchen island and looked at me as if I were an employee waiting to be dismissed. "Eleanor," she said, "we need to discuss practical arrangements." I folded the foil over a plate of sandwiches. "Tonight?" "Yes," Grant answered. "Tonight. The longer we wait, the messier this gets." I looked at him. Robert's son, the boy who had once asked me to teach him how to tie a tie before his first school dance. Now he looked at me like a legal problem. Caroline sighed softly. "No one wants to be cruel, but we all have to be realistic." Realistic. That word landed colder than any insult. Vanessa leaned forward. "This house is too large for you. The upkeep alone is more than someone in your position can reasonably handle." "My position?" I asked. Her mouth curved. "Eleanor, let's not pretend. Robert took care of you. He gave you a beautiful life. But now Robert is gone." The words were soft, but the message was not. Grant cleared his throat. "Dad's estate needs to be handled responsibly. There are children, grandchildren, tax issues, investments. We cannot have confusion over who stays where." I set the plate down. "Are you asking me to leave my home?" Caroline looked away first. That told me everything. Vanessa did not look away. She smiled, as if she had been waiting for the question. "I'm saying you should pack what you need and find somewhere appropriate." "Appropriate," I repeated. Caroline finally spoke again, her voice thin and polished. There are lovely senior residences outside the city. Private ones, comfortable, safe. You might even enjoy being around people your own age. People my own age. I had buried my husband that morning, and by nightfall, his daughter was suggesting storage for the elderly. Then Vanessa delivered the sentence she had been holding behind her teeth all evening. You were always a charity case, Eleanor. Robert was kind. Too kind, maybe. But kindness is not ownership. For a moment, the entire kitchen seemed to go silent. Even the refrigerator hum disappeared beneath the ringing in my ears. I looked at Ethan. He had not moved. He stared down at the floor, as if the pattern in the marble were suddenly the most important thing in the world. Ethan, whom I had held at 11 years old while he cried because his biological mother had left Savannah without saying goodbye. Ethan, whose fevers I had cooled with damp cloths. Ethan, whose graduation tie I had fixed with shaking, proud hands, while Robert pretended not to cry. Ethan, I said quietly. His eyes lifted halfway, then dropped again. Vanessa has a point, he whispered. Maybe it would be easier if you stayed somewhere else for a while. Somewhere else. Not home. Not here. Not with us. I felt something inside me break cleanly, almost gently. Not like glass shattering, but like a thread being cut. Vanessa straightened, pleased by his surrender. You can take the guest room tonight, she said. Tomorrow, Grant can help arrange movers for whatever belongs to you. Whatever belongs to you. I looked around the kitchen Robert and I had renovated together. The blue ceramic bowl from our trip to Maine, the copper pots I had bought in Charleston, the framed recipe card in Robert's handwriting taped inside the cabinet door because he had once tried to make my birthday dinner and nearly burned the sauce. They thought I owned memories. Nothing else. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and folded it carefully over the counter. Then I looked at each of them. Grant's impatience, Caroline's discomfort, Ethan's shame, Vanessa's victory. I gave them nothing dramatic, no tears, no begging, no scene they could later retell to make themselves feel justified. I only nodded. All right, I said. Vanessa blinked. What? All right, I repeated, my voice calm. I'll leave in the morning. For the first time all evening, she looked uncertain. Maybe she had expected a fight. Maybe she had wanted one. But I had spent enough years beside Robert to understand something about power. The loudest person in the room is not always the strongest. I walked past them toward the staircase. At the doorway, I paused and looked back at Ethan one last time. He still would not meet my eyes. That hurt more than Vanessa ever could. Upstairs, I closed the bedroom door behind me and placed one hand against Robert's empty side of the bed. The house below murmured with excited voices, already rearranging my life without me. I opened the closet, took out 2 old suitcases, and began to pack. Not everything, not even close. Just enough to let them believe they had won. I left the mansion before sunrise. No one came to the door. No one offered to carry my bags. No one asked where I would go. The only sound behind me was the soft closing of the front door, followed by the turn of the lock. I stood on the stone steps for a moment with my 2 old suitcases in my hands, looking back at the glowing windows of the house Robert and I had shared. To them, I was leaving with nothing. A few dresses, a pair of shoes, a widow's memories. That was exactly what I wanted them to think. I drove myself to a small hotel near Forsyth Park, far enough from the riverfront mansion to feel anonymous, close enough to the old city that I could still hear Savannah waking up outside my window. I checked in under my maiden name, Eleanor Hayes. The young clerk barely looked at me. To him, I was just another older woman with tired eyes and too little luggage. He handed me a key card and said breakfast started at 7. Perfect. In room 214, I placed my suitcases near the bed, sat at the small desk, and took out my phone. My first call was to Samuel Pierce, my private attorney. Samuel was 68, careful, dry-humored, and sharper than any courtroom lawyer I had ever met. He had silver-rimmed glasses, a voice like polished wood, and the rare ability to make disaster sound manageable. He had represented me quietly for nearly 20 years, long before the Whitmore family ever thought to wonder what I owned. "Eleanor," he said after the second ring. "I was hoping you would call." "They threw me out," I said. There was a short silence. "Vanessa?" "And Grant." Caroline stood there. Ethan allowed it. Samuel exhaled slowly. "I'm sorry." "So am I," I said. "But I'm ready." His voice changed then. Less sympathy, more precision. "You want to activate the asset file?" "Yes. Everything." Another pause, but this one carried weight. "Then let me remind you clearly," Samuel said. "The Savannah mansion was transferred into your sole ownership 12 years ago. Robert signed the documents himself. He retained the right to live there with you, but the property is yours. Not his estate's, not his children's. Yours." I closed my eyes. I remembered that day. Robert had been sitting at our kitchen table, embarrassed by how formal the papers looked. He had said, "You saved this house once, Eleanor. It should have your name on it." I had kissed his cheek and told him we did not need to explain ourselves to anyone. We never did. "What about Charleston?" I asked. "Still held under Hayes Harbor Group," Samuel replied. 3 boutique hotels, all active, all profitable. "And Atlanta?" "The commercial building is still yours. The last appraisal came in at $34 million. Even hearing the number did not move me. Not that morning. Not after what had happened in my kitchen. $34 million could not soften the memory of Ethan looking at the floor. "I need the original documents," I said. "Then go to First Atlantic Bank. Your box is still active. I'll call ahead." By 10 o'clock, I was standing in a private room at the bank, watching a manager place a long metal box on the table before me. Daniel Brooks, the branch manager, was in his early 50s, neatly dressed, with the cautious manners of a man who knew the difference between wealth and noise. He recognized me immediately, though he said nothing in front of the junior clerk. Once the door closed, he lowered his voice. "Mrs. Hayes?" he said, using the name on the account. "I'm sorry about Mr. Whitmore." "Thank you, Daniel." I unlocked the box. Inside were the truths Robert's family had never bothered to imagine. The deed to the mansion, ownership papers for the Charleston hotels, tax records, corporate documents, sealed appraisals, and the Atlanta building file. Daniel watched me lift the thick Atlanta folder. "Do you need privacy?" he asked. "I need discretion." He nodded. "You've always had it." That afternoon, I returned to the hotel through the side entrance. As I crossed the lobby, the hotel manager stopped halfway through greeting another guest. His eyes widened just slightly. Patrick Lowell, mid-40s, polished suit, perfect posture. Years ago, he had managed one of my early hospitality projects before moving to Savannah. He knew exactly who I was. For one dangerous second, I wondered if he would say my real name out loud. Instead, he stepped aside and gave me the smallest respectful nod. "Good afternoon, Ms. Hayes." Nothing more. That was when I knew I had chosen the right place. Upstairs, I spread the documents across the little hotel desk. The room was plain, The coffee was bitter. The curtains smelled faintly of dust. But in front of me lay a mansion, 3 hotels, and a $34 million secret. Down by the river, Vanessa was probably opening cabinets, testing bedrooms, and imagining herself the new lady of the house. Let her. Before long, she would learn the difference between standing inside a mansion and owning one. By the second day at the hotel, I learned that grief moves slowly, but greed does not. I had not answered a single call from the mansion. Vanessa called first, then Grant, then Caroline. Ethan did not call at all. That hurt more than the others, though I told myself not to be surprised. Instead of answering, I sat at the small hotel desk with the curtains half open, reviewing copies of the documents from the bank. The Savannah Mansion, the Charleston Hotels, the Atlanta Commercial Building. Everything important was exactly where it belonged, under my name. Down by the river, however, Robert's family had already started acting like conquerors. Marla, our housekeeper, called me that afternoon from her car. Her voice trembled with anger. "Mrs. Whitmore," she whispered. "Mrs. Vanessa moved her things into your bedroom." I closed my eyes. Of course she had. "She told the delivery men the primary suite belonged to her now," Marla continued. "She had them move your reading chair to the guest room, the blue one Mr. Whitmore bought you." For a moment, I saw Robert in that chair, asleep with a book open on his chest, pretending he had been reading. "Did she touch the locked cabinet?" I asked. "She tried," Marla said. "Then she called a locksmith." I almost laughed, though there was no humor in it. Vanessa had hired a locksmith to change the locks on a house she did not own. "Let him come," I said quietly. "Just make sure you don't sign anything." Marla paused. "You're not worried?" "No," I said. "Not anymore." Later that same afternoon, Samuel called with an update. His tone carried the faint amusement of a man watching careless people walk into a trap they had built themselves. "Grant contacted a real estate broker," he said. "He wants a valuation on the mansion." "Of course he does." He also asked whether the property could be sold quickly after probate. I looked at the deed lying on the desk in front of me. Probate won't help him sell something Robert didn't own. "No," Samuel said. "But Grant doesn't know that yet." By evening, I received another piece of news from an unexpected source. Caroline had tried to arrange a private appraisal for one of the paintings in the dining room, a coastal oil painting Robert and I bought years ago in Charleston. It was not the most expensive piece in the house, but it was beautiful, soft blue water beneath a stormy sky. Caroline had always admired it. Apparently, admiration had become intention. The auction house refused to proceed without ownership records. They called the number on file. Mine. A young woman named Rebecca Lane, an assistant specialist from the auction house, explained it carefully. "Mrs. Hayes, a Caroline Whitmore contacted us regarding a possible sale, but the provenance records list you as the owner." I held the phone in silence for 1 second longer than necessary. "Thank you for checking," I said. "That painting is not for sale." "Understood," Rebecca replied. "We'll mark the request as unauthorized." Unauthorized. Such a clean word for such an ugly act. The next morning, Grant found something that finally disturbed them. I knew because Vanessa left a voicemail at 8:17 a.m., her voice tight beneath its usual polish. "Eleanor, we found a contract in Robert's office. It has your name on it as some kind of financial guarantor. We need you to explain what that means." I listened to it twice. The document must have been from the 2008 refinancing. A harmless copy, old and incomplete, but enough to confuse them. Enough to suggest that the story they had told themselves about Robert's wealth was not entirely true. I deleted the message. By noon, the calls became more frequent. Grant wanted to know why certain investment accounts were closed. Caroline wanted to know where Robert kept the certificates for the antiques. Vanessa wanted me to come back and clear up a few misunderstandings. They had moved into my bedroom, tried to change my locks, attempted to sell my painting, and started pricing my home. And still, they believed the problem was confusion. That evening, just as Savannah's streets turned gold outside my hotel window, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I knew by heart. Lily. Grandma, are you okay? 4 words. They broke through me harder than all the insults had. I stared at the screen until it blurred. Then I typed back slowly. I'm okay, sweetheart. Be brave. I love you. A minute later, 3 little dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. I love you too. Daddy looks sad. I set the phone down and pressed my hand over my mouth. For the first time since leaving the mansion, I almost cried. Not for Vanessa, not for Grant, not for Caroline. For Ethan, who had lost his spine somewhere between childhood and adulthood. And for Lily, who was still young enough to know cruelty when she saw it, but too young to understand why adults dressed it up as family business. That night, I opened the file Samuel had labeled Whitmore Residence, Ownership History. The truth was all there. The transfer, the signatures, the dates, the legal protections. They were digging through Robert's drawers, hoping to find treasure. All they were finding were shadows. And sooner or later, even greedy people become afraid when the numbers stop adding up. The formal will reading was scheduled for Monday morning at the office of Whitaker and Pierce, a quiet law firm on a shaded street near downtown Savannah. I arrived 10 minutes early. I wore a navy dress instead of black, my pearl earrings, and the same calm expression I had practiced in the hotel mirror. Not because I felt calm, but because I had learned long ago that people reveal more when they believe they are safe. Samuel Pierce met me in the hallway. He carried a leather briefcase in one hand and 3 thick folders in the other. His silver-rimmed glasses sat low on his nose, and his expression was mild enough to fool anyone who did not know him. "Are you ready?" he asked. "No," I said, "but I'm here." That is often enough. We entered the conference room together. Vanessa saw me first. She sat near the head of the polished table, dressed in a cream-colored designer suit that felt almost disrespectful after a funeral. Her dark hair was perfect, her posture straight, and when I walked in, she gave me a small, mocking smile. The kind of smile a person gives someone they believe has already lost. Grant sat beside her, checking messages on his phone, wearing a charcoal suit and a gold watch Robert had once called too loud. Caroline sat across from him in a black silk blouse, hands folded neatly over a leather notebook. Ethan sat at the far end, pale and uneasy, his eyes moving from Samuel's folders to my face. For once, Ethan looked confused. Not guilty, not dismissive. Confused. As if some quiet part of him had begun to understand that none of this was unfolding the way Vanessa promised it would. The family's attorney, Martin Kell, was a round-faced man in his 50s with careful manners and nervous hands. He introduced himself politely, then took his place at the table with a copy of Robert's will in front of him. Samuel sat beside me and placed the first folder on the table, then the second, then the third. He did it slowly, deliberately. Each folder landed with a soft, heavy sound. Vanessa's eyes flicked toward them. "What are those?" she asked. "Records," Samuel said. "Records of what?" "All in good time." Martin cleared his throat and began reading. The first few minutes were formal language. Robert's full name, his state of mind, his charitable gifts, a donation to the church, a scholarship fund for a local school. Small, thoughtful bequests that sounded exactly like the man I had loved. Then Martin reached the part they had been waiting for. To my children, Grant Whitmore, Caroline Whitmore, and Ethan Whitmore. I leave the sum of $75,000 each. Grant looked up sharply. Caroline's mouth parted. Vanessa sat perfectly still. Martin continued, his voice thinner now. The remainder of my estate, including personal accounts, business interests, and all property legally held in my name at the time of my death, I leave to my beloved wife, Eleanor Hayes Whitmore. Silence filled the room. Not grief, not respect. Calculation. That can't be right, Grant said. Caroline leaned forward. 75,000 each? Vanessa turned to Martin. What about the mansion? Martin hesitated. The will only controls property Mr. Whitmore legally owned. Vanessa's face tightened. What is that supposed to mean? Samuel opened the first folder, but he did not speak yet. He waited. Vanessa turned toward me, her voice rising. This is absurd. She doesn't deserve any of this. She never built anything. She never worked. She just stood beside Robert and smiled while he paid for her life. I remained silent. Grant shifted uncomfortably. Caroline stared at the table. Ethan looked at me for the first time since the night they threw me out. Vanessa laughed once, sharp and ugly. Let's stop pretending, she said. You didn't make that money, Eleanor. You didn't earn that house. You didn't create anything. You were just lucky Robert was kind enough to carry you. Still, I said nothing. Then she leaned across the table and delivered the sentence that changed the temperature of the room. You didn't make anything, Vanessa said. You were nothing before Robert. You're still nothing now. Samuel opened the first folder. That statement, he said calmly, is factually incorrect. He slid a certified property record into the center of the table. Vanessa frowned at it. Samuel's voice stayed gentle, almost pleasant. The Savannah residence was not part of Robert Whitmore's estate. It could not be inherited by his children, sold by his children, or occupied by his children without permission. Grant stared at him. Why not? Samuel looked at me briefly, then back at them. Because Robert did not own it. The room went still. Caroline whispered, What? Samuel placed another document on top of the first. The mansion has been in Eleanor Hayes Whitmore's sole legal ownership for 12 years. Vanessa's face changed. Not completely, not yet, but enough. The smile disappeared, and for the first time since the funeral, she looked at me not like an old woman she could remove from her path, but like a locked door she had mistaken for an open one. I folded my hands on the table and finally spoke. You should have asked whose house you were standing in before you told me to leave it. I let Samuel's words settle over the conference room. For 12 years. The mansion had been mine for 12 years. Vanessa stared at the property record as if the ink might rearrange itself if she hated it hard enough. Grant reached for the document, but Samuel placed one finger on the edge before he could pull it away. That is a certified copy, Samuel said. The original is secured. Grant's jaw tightened. There has to be a mistake. There isn't. But Dad lived there, Caroline whispered. Yes, I said, with me. I stood slowly, not dramatically, not for effect. I stood because I was done allowing people to discuss my life as if I were not in the room. When I met Robert, I began. I was not poor. I was not helpless, and I was not waiting for a man to rescue me. No one interrupted. My first husband, Thomas Hayes, died when I was 38. He left me life insurance, stock holdings, and 2 small rental properties outside Atlanta. I could have lived quietly off that money. Instead, I learned how to grow it. Samuel opened the second folder. Inside were company records, old investment statements, hotel contracts, and tax filings under Hayes Harbor Group. I bought neglected buildings when everyone else saw risk, I continued. Small hotels along the coast, commercial property no bank wanted to touch. Shares in companies people laughed at until they stopped laughing. Vanessa's face had lost its color. "What does that have to do with Robert's house?" she asked, though her voice had weakened. "Everything," I said. "Robert's house was heavily mortgaged when we married. His business looked respectable, but respectability does not always pay bills. I refinanced the mansion. I paid the property taxes. I paid the insurance. I paid for the roof after the storm, the plumbing restoration, the garden wall, the kitchen renovation you were so eager to take over." Her lips parted. "The bedroom you moved into," I added, looking directly at her, "is in a house paid for and legally owned by me." Vanessa sat back as if I had slapped her. Grant grabbed another page from the table. His eyes moved quickly, desperately, searching for an escape. "So we can't sell it," he said. Samuel's expression remained polite. "You cannot sell what you do not own." Grant looked almost offended by the simplicity of it. Caroline had gone very still. She was staring at the antique inventory list Samuel had placed in front of her. Her hand trembled as she touched the page. "The Charleston painting," she said weakly. "Mine," I said. "The Silva dining set?" "Mine." "The Sheraton cabinet in the east parlor?" "Also mine." Caroline covered her mouth. Tears filled her eyes, but they were not tears of grief. They were tears of humiliation. She had already imagined those things in her own home. She had already placed price tags on memories she never earned. Samuel opened the final folder. "This is a consolidated valuation prepared last quarter," he said. "Savannah Residence, Charleston Hospitality Holdings, Atlanta Commercial Building, Investment Portfolio, Antiques, and Liquid Accounts. Current estimated value, slightly over $58 million. The number landed harder than any insult. $58 million. Martin Kell, the family attorney, removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Vanessa whispered, "That's impossible." "No," I said. What was impossible was pretending Robert supported a life he could not afford without my help. Ethan had not spoken once. He sat at the end of the table, pale and quiet, looking not at the documents, but at me. I saw recognition moving across his face. Slow, painful, unwelcome. He was remembering, perhaps, the years when the school tuition was paid early, the summer camp he thought his father arranged, the car Robert gave him at graduation, the medical bills after his accident at 17, the wedding rehearsal dinner Vanessa had praised as very Whitmore. None of it had been Robert alone. Much of it had been me. "I never told you," I said, softer now, looking at Ethan more than the others. "Because Robert wanted to feel like he had given his children everything. I loved him enough to let him keep that pride." Ethan's eyes reddened. "So all those years," he said, barely above a whisper. "All those years," I replied. "I protected the family name you all used to measure my worth." Grant looked down. Caroline cried silently. Vanessa, however, only looked trapped. That told me everything I needed to know. I gathered my purse and turned toward Samuel. "Are we finished here?" Samuel closed the folders one by one. "For today," he said. Before I reached the door, Vanessa spoke behind me, small and bitter. "Why didn't you just tell us?" I turned back. "Because decent people do not need a bank statement before deciding whether a grieving widow deserves kindness. No one answered. There was nothing left to say. I did not raise my voice in that conference room. I did not threaten them. I did not ask for apologies that would only come because the truth had cornered them. I simply looked at Vanessa, Grant, Caroline, and Ethan, and said, "You have 72 hours to remove your belongings from my house." Samuel stood beside me, silent but firm, while Martin Kell stared at his legal pad as if he wished he had never taken the meeting. Vanessa opened her mouth to argue, but I held up one hand. "After that, the locks will be changed." Vanessa followed me into the hallway, her heels striking the floor like little acts of violence. "Eleanor, wait. We can work this out." Her voice had changed completely. The sharpness was still there, but now it was covered with panic. "We're family." I turned to face her. "Family?" I asked. "You defined family the night you told me to pack my bags. You decided blood mattered more than love. You decided money mattered more than grief." Her face tightened. I was upset. "No," I said quietly. "You were greedy." By the next afternoon, Vanessa had brought reinforcements to the mansion. When I arrived with Samuel and 2 property representatives, I found her parents standing in my foyer. Her father, Richard Patterson, was a retired high school principal in his late 60s, tall, formal, and clearly uncomfortable. Her mother, Linda Patterson, was a soft-spoken woman with carefully curled gray hair and worried eyes. Vanessa stood between them like a victim waiting to be defended. "My daughter says there has been a terrible misunderstanding," Richard Patterson said. I looked at him and replied, "There has. She misunderstood who owned the house." I told them everything, calmly. I told them how Vanessa stood in my kitchen on the night Robert was buried and ordered me to leave. I told them she called me a charity case. I told them Grant and Caroline helped themselves to appraisals and sale plans. I told them Ethan stood there and said nothing. Linda Patterson slowly raised one hand to her mouth. Richard Patterson turned toward Vanessa with a look of deep embarrassment. "Vanessa," he said, his voice heavy, "please tell me you did not throw this woman out of her own home after her husband's funeral." Vanessa's silence answered for her. Then her father faced me. "Mrs. Whitmore, I am ashamed. On behalf of our family, I apologize." After that, the house changed quickly. Grant packed without looking at me, carrying boxes from the study to his truck with the stiff posture of a man trying to save what little dignity he had left. Caroline cried quietly as she removed her bags from the guest room, but she did not ask to keep a single antique. Vanessa stayed angry until the end, slamming drawers and whispering that I had ruined everything. Ethan was the only one who came back inside after loading his car. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen, pale and broken. "Eleanor," he said, "I'm sorry." I looked at the boy I had raised and the man who had failed me. "I hear you," I said, "but I'm not ready to forgive you yet." When the last car left the driveway, the mansion felt enormous and strangely quiet. On the dining table, beneath a folded napkin, I found a drawing from Lily. It showed a little girl holding hands with an older woman in front of a big house. Across the top, in uneven purple letters, she had written, "I miss you, Grandma." That was the first time I cried. Not because I had lost the house. I had not. Not because Vanessa had hurt me. She had. I cried because Lily still knew what family was supposed to feel like. At exactly 6 o'clock, the locksmith arrived. His name was Calvin Reed, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, with kind eyes and a toolbox worn smooth from years of work. He changed every lock while Samuel checked the final property notice at the kitchen island. When Calvin handed me the new keys, their weight felt different in my palm. Not heavier, cleaner. I stood in the doorway of my own home and listened to the quiet. For the first time since Robert died, no one inside that house was pretending to love me while measuring what they could take. The mansion was mine again, and so was my peace. 6 months after the locks were changed, the mansion no longer felt like a tomb. I opened the curtains every morning, filled the rooms with fresh flowers, and stopped whispering when I passed Robert's portrait in the hall. Grief was still there, but it no longer owned every corner of me. The house had survived greed, betrayal, and silence. So had I. That spring, I made a decision that shocked Savannah society more than any will ever could. I would not sell the mansion. I would not hide inside it. I would turn it into something useful. I named it the Second Door Foundation. The idea came to me one quiet afternoon while I was standing in the front entry, looking at the door Vanessa had once forced me to walk through. She had meant that door to be an ending. Instead, it had become the entrance to the rest of my life. The foundation would provide scholarships, housing support, and legal guidance for older women who had been pushed aside by families who thought age made them powerless. Women who had been widowed, abandoned, manipulated, or treated like furniture after decades of sacrifice. I knew exactly how that felt. The first person I invited back to the mansion was Lily. Ethan brought her on a Saturday morning, nervous and quiet, carrying a small backpack and wearing a yellow dress covered in tiny daisies. The moment she saw me, she ran across the foyer and wrapped both arms around my waist. "Grandma Eleanor," she whispered, "do I still get to come here?" I bent down and held her face in my hands. "Sweetheart, you were never the one who had to leave." She smiled then, and for the first time in months, the house sounded like a home again. Grant and Caroline did not come back right away. I heard updates through mutual friends. Grant had sold his expensive car and taken a consulting job with less prestige than he liked to admit. Caroline moved into a smaller townhouse and started working with a local arts nonprofit. Perhaps because being denied the antiques had finally taught her the difference between beauty and ownership. I did not celebrate their struggles, but I did not rescue them either. They were adults, and for the first time, they were living without the fantasy of Robert's fortune waiting underneath them like a safety net. Vanessa lasted 3 months after the truth came out. Once she understood Ethan had no mansion, no inheritance, and no hidden Whitmore empire to offer her, she filed for divorce. She came to see me once, wearing large sunglasses and a soft voice she had clearly practiced. "Eleanor, I said terrible things. I was grieving." I looked at her carefully. There was regret in her face, but not for me. She regretted losing access. She regretted miscalculating. She regretted that the woman she had called a charity case had turned out to be the gatekeeper. "Vanessa," I said, "you're not sorry you hurt me. You're sorry I had the power to survive it." She left without another word. Ethan returned differently. Not with excuses, not with demands. He came to volunteer at the foundation, carrying boxes, setting up chairs, answering phones, and sitting quietly while women twice his age told stories that made him lower his eyes. One evening, after everyone had gone, he said, "I don't want your money, Eleanor. I want the chance to become someone you don't have to be ashamed of loving." That was the first honest thing he had said in a long time. I told him we could begin again, slowly, with boundaries, with truth, with no pretending. Because I was no longer the invisible woman behind the Whitmore name. I was Eleanor Hayes Whitmore, widow, investor, founder, grandmother, and the only person who decided who deserved a place in my life.